Carlos is the founder and managing partner at the Lucan Center for Strategies on Water and the Environment, and he has more than 30 years of experience in environmental research and practice along the U.S.-Mexico border. And Carlos, I don't know, are you an honorary member of the Traveling Wilburys?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later.
But yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Doug. And thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here. This is the first time. I was hearing that 46 times this has taken place. And for me, it's a first. And thank you so much, Henny. So, being the first time here, I really was impressed by the level of professionalism and seriousness of discussions yesterday. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me in a journey through the basics of the basin and diplomacy in the U.S.-Mexico agreement. Let me see how I can, I guess, is this, how do you, the arrows, okay. Back in 2007, when the U.S. started talking about shortage guidelines, Mexico was not included. And the talks began, and shortly thereafter, there was a tragedy. An airplane fell to the ground and took with it both commissioners. So soon thereafter, Roberto Salmon became the Mexican commissioner, and you see him there. He has now passed away, but you see him there with Ed Drusina, and a epic meeting in Hotel Lucerna in Tijuana that finalized the details of Minute 319. But over the course of, from 2009, when he got to SILA, the Mexican section, and 2012, it was a surprise to him that we were not engaged, Mexico was not engaged in a binational dialogue. We didn't really know who Mexico was engaging in a dialogue with. It's not a US-Mexico dialogue, it's 7 basin states, it's native tribes, it's NGOs, it's industry. It's a mess. And it took a while for Mexico to understand that. And over the course of history, I think that it really serves the US to know who Mexico is when we start talking, and particularly now when there's so much going on the north side of the border in terms of the dialogue that really seems to fog out the US-Mexico dialogue. So, so I want you to bear with me in this concept of parallel universes that seems to be a reality. Mexico is much more centralized and often just wonders, why don't just the states agree and we can go on with it? And even stuff like, for instance, groundwater. Why can't we agree on groundwater given the fact that Mexico owns the water, and in the US, who owns the water in the US? Of course, agriculture is a big difference. Agriculture is not an industry per se. Historically, agriculture has been a political constituency for the Mexican federal government, who owns the water. It's only as recent as 1992 that the federal government of Mexico not only managed the water, but managed the irrigation districts. So you're looking at as I said, a parallel universe that actually begins to defy how we're talking. There are some implications to those differences. For instance, agricultural conservation in the US becomes a matter of economic efficiency, whereas in Mexico, it's a political risk. Water markets become then a potential loss of control of the water for Mexico. Over the course of 100 and more years, 120 years or so, Mexico and the United States, we've agreed on water, except for once. And that issue was, of course, the lining of the All-American Canal. And why did it occur? Because the United States started talking about water markets, oh God, maybe in the 70s or 80s. And for us, it was an issue of having an environmental impact south of the border. We were not privy to how markets were working, and so Mexico was really behind on that curve. That creates the paradox or the complication that we are responding to the same hydrologic challenges with very different economic and political systems. And of course, in the 1940s, when the treaty was signed, there was a world war. Mexico got a good deal. That's how we see it on the Mexican side. There are people in Mexico that say that there's some remnants of the Harman Doctrine of having dammed up the river and then signing the 1944 treaty. But the truth of the matter is that now we're facing with a different river altogether. And there are some blind spots that we're starting to see how we can update. For instance, salinity over the course of the 80 years faced a challenge in the 1960s and 1970s. And that was the crisis that Mexico assumed that the Colorado River needed some adjustment. Minute 242, I've told my colleagues, we work there and Raise the River, the NGOs, there are two icons in Mexico. One is La Virgen de Guadalupe, and the other is Minute 242. It keeps us safe from the gringos. It keeps salinity under control, but that's outdated. And now we understand that. And so that needs to have adjustment. Agricultural transformation is also an issue that begins to raise its head, rear its head. There was a recent article that I got invited by Ann Castle to write, and that talks about the allocation. And there are elements there that I believe are really quite important, and one of them is salinity. The second one is agricultural transformation. The third one is groundwater, because we are negotiating for surface water while we're using increasing amounts of groundwater. And of course, climate change adaptation is just altogether the big issue. If you see the evolution of how things are changing in our binational dialogue, we look at it this way. There was a first phase in all, that's on the left of the screen. All those elements were brought about by the 1944 treaty, but when you hit 2007 and when the US begins to talk with Mexico, Mexico didn't really understand what was behind the wall. It was just a faucet that provided 1.5 million acre feet religiously. You could even schedule it month by month, given the treaty, and that was it. But after that, you begin to share shortages. You begin to talk about storing Mexican water in Lake Mead. So a joint investment in infrastructure for efficiency, cooperative approach to structural deficit. This is a whole new ballgame on the Mexican side. And you can see, my point is, we have really been evolving in terms of how the dialogue comes. And so in thinking about that, I'd like for you to think how hard it is to stop talking about allocation and begin to start talking about the basin. Can we actually begin to go to the basics of how we build resilience regardless of where our actions are required? In other words, not just commitments, they're not going to be enough. We are going to have to look at the basin as a one river type of system and think about how we build resilient agriculture and how we begin to talk about making it worthwhile for farmers on both sides of the border to have regenerative agriculture, because regenerative agriculture is, at least in the irrigation district in Mexicali, a dire need. There are 180,000 hectares, which is somewhere just under 500,000 acres in Mexicali. 1/3 of it is no longer useful. 1/3. Because of the salinity, because of the lack of management, because of the fact that farmers are now focusing just on alfalfa because there's no other crop that will actually survive. There used to be cotton and wheat in the range of 40,000 to 60,000 hectares. They're down to 20,000 hectares, which is 50,000 acres. So resilient agriculture, resilient watersheds. How long are we going to survive in the Colorado River by just managing demand? If you will, if I can express a healthy watershed as managing supply, then we begin to think how jointly we can talk about this. And resilient ecosystems, of course, they're the keystone of what we're talking about in terms of joining water management with climate change control. And that's something that we're doing in the Delta. That's something that was really foreign to farmers in Mexicali until about a couple of years ago, when we started talking to them and started reasoning how we could actually build something together. Yesterday, there was talk about solar panels. And there was a question asked about agrivoltaics. Agrivoltaics may be hard to do in the US because of what Tina Shields and the folks at IID have reasoned. You don't tell farmers what to do. On the Mexican side, I think the farmers are wanting us to tell them, help them what to do. Agrivoltaics for us is a way to diversify revenue streams. It's a way for them to begin to shift from being an agent of extraction, a miner, to a steward of the land. You need to diversify so that we're not talking just about water as a source of income. Agrivoltaics will actually make it possible for us, for farmers. The farmers in Mexicali are the only irrigation district in Mexico that did not sign on to President Claudia Sheinbaum's National Water Plan. Out of the 40 irrigation districts, it is the only one that did not sign on. And that is because of the crisis that is happening. And the only way they're going to relinquish any water rights, and you know, they have experience since minute 319. Farmers in Mexicali have received income from the agreements of the minute to line canals and create smart spill gates and so on and so forth. They don't want any part of that anymore because now they understand that water is being taken from them. And I don't know, there's probably a coin flip. If you ask a farmer in Mexicali who's responsible for the lack of water, half of them will say climate change, and the other half will say the United States. Because we still believe that there is this Yankee imperialism in agricultural, in the agricultural sector, because of all of the history that has taken place over the course of the last 80 years. So the bottom line is that I'm hoping that a binational dialogue, maybe not immediately, maybe not ready-made, but in the near future can begin to turn towards a shared resilience, shared stewardship, so that we can create the conditions for stewardship to become profitable for both sides of the border. I really thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. So we certainly have covered a lot of territory so far. Yesterday afternoon, at the end of the day, it was quite an opportunity to hear directly from Mr. Cameron about the status of the post-2026 guidelines from the perspective of the Bureau of Reclamation. And I think one take-home message from that conversation yesterday is that we had been hoping for certainly a new 20-year plan and some certainty moving forward. And based on what we heard from Mr. Cameron yesterday, I think the reality now is that we'll need ongoing collaborative conversations. It seems like we're in maybe a new plan of two-year operating guidelines. And so that's going to require some ongoing conversations. And so I'm very grateful for Becky and John both to be here with us this morning so we can talk a little bit about where the states stand and the state of conversations amongst the states. So I know this has been a very difficult process for the states and for the negotiators and individuals leading the states. So first, I just want to express our gratitude for taking the time to be with us here this morning. And it's certainly a wonderful opportunity for all of us to hear directly from the commissioners on where they stand. So we have worked through a set of questions in advance, so I'll run through those, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A as well. And so please use the Slido platform to share questions. Brief introductions. I don't know if Becky and John need introductions at this point, but I will provide some brief introductions. Becky is the state of Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission, and she previously worked as the director of the Colorado Conservation Board and has been working on Colorado River issues for many years. And John is the general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority and has been appointed by the governor to serve as Nevada's lead negotiator on Colorado River matters, and is also an alumni of Colorado Law School. So John, welcome back to your alma mater. Go Buffs. Okay, so I'm gonna kick it off with the first question, and then we'll just go from there. So Becky, maybe we'll start with you. So the Bureau of Reclamation, as I just mentioned, has announced its intent to initiate a new 10-year management framework comprised of 5 two-year plans. And it's been suggested that the recent lower basin proposal might serve as the first of the 5 two-year plans. So is that realistic? And how might that proposal need to be refined? And can you imagine what the process might look like for developing subsequent plans? And so Becky, we'll start with you.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. In terms of I want to start with the last piece of that question. I have no idea what that process would look like, constantly negotiating every 2 years. That would be incredibly difficult. But we can get maybe more into that in a bit. The first thing I think that struck out to me in seeing some of what came out of the federal government was that was actually tied to actual conditions. So the fact that it was looking at what the system is producing, but also what's in the reservoirs, that was, I think, beneficial and a bit of a shift. And so when we look at sustainable operations and the ability to rebuild storage and rebuild the security of the system, I think that was definitely a positive. The constant renegotiation every 2 years is difficult to fathom. And I when I first saw that, had no idea that was coming. All I could think about was the certainty that folks had asked for through this process. How do we build the resilience that Carlos was talking about without some level of certainty? We've all talked about the potential for funding being a part of the solution, and funding and financing, and I've wondered, how do we fund and finance if we're constantly renegotiating? And so how do we create the certainty that the 40 million people deserve? I will always say this, and I think it's important to say, and I know it's difficult for some of my partners in the room, not John, but without a commitment to set aside some of the legal theories, and I think we're all guilty of that, in both sides of the basin, without a commitment to set those aside, I think we're going to struggle. And I have concern with the every 2-year renegotiation that we get further entrenched in those legal theories, further entrenched in kind of building up that wall of what our expectations are. And so in regards to the Lower Basin Plan, I commend my Lower Basin partners. I think they put in a lot of effort and work. I believe it's a starting point. It still raises some concern. I want to be honest. It raises some concern, may need a little bit of refinement. And I constantly look at things and say, are we doing better than what we're doing now? Are we doing better than the 07 guidelines? Can we do better than status quo? And so I also think that we're in a not a unique time. This is common time at this point. But we're either in the middle of a crisis or on the brink of a crisis. And when you go into an emergency room with a cut artery and the triage, you stop the bleeding. And so I think I often think about that, particularly now when we're in situations where Powell's going to be releasing 6 million acre feet. We're doing 660 to 1 million acre feet from the upper initial units. And so when I think about a 2-year plan, I think about how do we stop the bleeding? And we need some certainty of what those releases are for the next 2 years. So as we move forward, I hope that we can answer the question, not are we building a series of Band-Aids, but are we building some sort of certainty and resilience for the basin and for the future? So can we build something that withstands the uncertainty that is hydrology? And so regardless, and I need to say this, and I know there's probably a bingo card or something out there that's like, oh, this is going to be said, but I think it's important to recognize like what the upper basin can do and what's the limits and the range of our capabilities. First and foremost, I mean, you heard from Jason this morning, the fact that guy can be here when we've just declared a drought emergency. We're cutting off people across the state. We're in the 1800s in terms of water right priority. But regardless of that, what we are going to do is strict administration. We're going to continue with that, and it is difficult and it is painful. But we also stand ready and have said this since day one. We stand ready to put a contribution program on the table. We stand ready to figure out what that looks like. Even in these tough times that is this year, we are willing to put a contribution plan together. And that has to be, we know it's part of a framework. If we can come up with a framework, we can do more together than individual basins. We know that. And so We also, though, I believe, need to step forward to solve the math problem together. I know there'll be questions about litigation, and that's not going to solve the problem. There is a problem, and if we can't do that as 7 states, then we know reclamation is going to have to do that. But we've kicked the can down the road long enough. There's a lot of cans. There's a lot of lobbyists. There's a lot of theories. And if we don't solve this, there's going to be a lot of high-paid lawyers. Some might be in this room. Hopefully not. But there's going to be a lot of high-priced attorneys that maybe not focused on the math problem. And so that's where I think we need to be.
Thanks, Becky. John.
You done?
I know, that went a little longer than I expected. I was like 2 minutes each question. Sorry, John. You want me to answer for you?
I will be more succinct.
Of course.
Although I do want to recognize I did study under both Charles Wilkinson and David Getches and Mrs. Getches. I appreciate your husband being a mentor to me, so thank you. I actually agree with Becky that the every 2-year segment is not a good plan. When Nevada put out our plan, which the Lower Basin proposal is substantially based upon, we based years 3 through 10 on analysis of a process, not an analysis of actual numbers and actual elevations, so that you don't have to go back and redo NEPA every single year. And it was based upon the exact same kind of process that was done under LTEMP. So I believe there's, I keep calling it a 30-month plan, but I started calling it that in April, and now it's June, so it's probably more like a 28-month plan. But there's a reasonable, rational operating plan for the next 2+ years right in front of our face. And we should take that, and the record of decision should reflect analysis of a process that will determine future operations. And ultimately, that's probably the best way, A, to operate the river, and B, to keep us out of court until 2029.
Thanks, John. And Becky, I think, just referred to the drought declaration that the governor made yesterday, correct? While we were sitting here in the conference yesterday afternoon, the governor issued an emergency declaration of drought conditions in the state of Colorado. So just wanted to share that with all of you. So we covered maybe some of this territory, but in the absence of an agreement, we're moving towards a situation in which the river seems to be becoming more federalized in the midst of a hydrologic crisis. So without an agreement among the basin states, in the past they've been able to provide an agreement to the federal government, and that served as the foundation for operational decisions. And now we're approaching a situation where the government will be having to make unilateral decisions in the absence of a state agreement. And we heard yesterday that this new 10-year framework might provide kind of the outline for how that's going to happen. Possibly this could end up in the federal courts through litigation. We've also acknowledged that risk. And so maybe we'll start with you, John, this time. But what are your views and concerns along these lines of federalizing the river, and how can we ensure that the river is managed in a more cooperative manner under these conditions by federal, state, and tribal officials moving forward?
Well, ever since I've worked on this river, and I know this is going to be to the chagrin of tribal interests and environmental interests in the room, the mantra has been the law of the river is what the 7 states can agree it is. And if the 7 states can't agree on what the law of the river is, then I don't know if it's federal courts, I don't know if it's Congress, I don't know who it is, but a different set of humans is going to make the decisions other than the 7 governors' representatives. And you don't have to look very far to the Delaware or the Klamath to find rivers that are operated under consent decrees. And I think, the Secretary of Interior is already the water master in the lower basin under a decree. And if the upper basin wants to roll the dice that the Secretary becomes the water master in the upper basin, that's one of the risks, they're running and not reaching agreement.
Becky.
Yeah, I think the constant kind of threat of the federalization reflects the reality that as hydrology worsens, consensus is harder to come by. It is these questions and the discussions that we're having are different than they have been in the past. There's a lot happening at the same time. And so I continue to think, just similar to John, and I agree with John, that the strength of this basin has come when we've been able to work together. How we're going to build resilience is by working together. And so that's where the durable solutions are. And so I think hydrology is changing faster than our governance structures are adapting. And that's kind of why these discussions are happening. And so as we think about how to move into the future, what that looks like, I think the question is not whether the river will be federalized. I think it's, can this basin govern itself well enough that the federalization is a backstop, not a primary management? And that shouldn't be the strategy. I think we're better than that.
Aren't those two sides of the same coin? If we can't govern ourselves, isn't federalization inevitable?
Yep.
Okay.
That's what I said.
You just used 30 more words tonight.
Yeah.
We're making progress.
I love the personal attacks, John.
We're
Is
making,
that a powder blue quarter zip you're wearing today?
It's Carolina blue.
we're making progress. Great. So let's talk briefly about the 1922 Compact, which provides a framework for this conversation about potential federalization of the river. But the primary purpose of the compact is to equitably divide and apportion the waters of the Colorado River among the upper and lower basins. And we all know, I think, that the compact underlies a lot of these difficult questions. And there's competing interpretations on what the compact promises, but there's no question that the long-term drought, the hydrology we've been talking about, is making it difficult or potentially impossible to accommodate the perceived commitments to each subbasin. And so in light of this fundamental challenge, how should the parties respond to these kind of uncertainties around what the 1922 Compact means for the upper and lower basins?
Do I get to go first?
You can,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
you can go first.
I think the compact established the framework. It doesn't promise a creation of water. We can't create water, that is not there. So the compact never provided that level of certainty, but it did provide a framework. So it divides the water, it doesn't create it. It really addresses how we share the risk and share the burden. We can't, it doesn't define what we do when the water's not there that folks think that we were promised. And so I think, can we develop operating rules that work within that framework? That's the question, without throwing it away. In these uncertain times, can we do that? I believe we can. I'm going to be succinct so that I can judge you for your law, because he's a lawyer on this one.
Okay. Look, there's no dispute that the compact is inherently ambiguous. We have a 4-page compact and a 400-page DEIS. They did not answer all the questions. The first line is the purpose is to equitably apportion the river, which a lot of people will tell you means 50-50. But if you read a lot of Supreme Court precedent, equitable apportionment is not 50-50. There's first in time, first in right. A lot of the rationale for Delph Carpenter wanting to enter into the compact was the Colorado's loss in Colorado v. Wyoming, which said prior appropriation applied across state lines. So you could say, maybe rationally, okay, equitable apportionment, obviously, 50 for you, 50 for us. You can also get to Article 3 and say, the upper basin, and I'm not going to get into, shall not deplete or guaranteed to deliver or whatever, but there's, and some form of obligation to deliver 7.5 and some form of obligation to deliver half of the Mexican obligation. And those clauses of the compact collide. Hence, what the 7 states can agree to is the law of the river. Otherwise, you're turning the decision over how to interpret those clauses of the compact to a different set of humans. And I know I'm being a bit repetitive here, but just because the way the question was framed in terms of equitable apportionment, I feel like I need to point out that, again, being an alumni of this law school, and the first rule we learned the first day of contract class was read on. Don't stop reading the first sentence. You have to read the entire thing. And there are inconsistent, ambiguous provisions within the compact that the only way you're ever going to have any certainty on that is probably Supreme Court action. And if you want to avoid that, the way you avoid that is a 7-state agreement.
Thanks for that, John. For all the law students in the room, it's important to know that the lawyer is always the most succinct person.
Might have won that.
Okay, so let's turn to a conversation about water conservation, which we heard a lot about yesterday. And the question is this: looking at the regional water budget, and it's hard to envision achieving a truly sustainable river, given the hydrology, unless water demands are scaled back in a significant and permanent manner. So are large-scale reductions in irrigated agriculture an essential component of the road forward in this regard? And if so, what is the right process for doing that, including the federal government's potential role? And if not, then what is the alternative?
You're first on this one.
Oh, great, thanks. Look, if you're going from a legal allocation, plus evaporation of 18 million acre feet, to a 20th century, hydrology of 15 million acre feet, to a 21st century hydrology of, 10 to 11 million acre feet, 80% of the water use is ag. So they're gonna have to be a partner. But I'm also not a fan of the idea of offshoring our food production. So, the last time I testified in front of the Senate, Senator Manchin asked me if I were king for a day, what's the one single thing I would do? And my answer was massive investment in agricultural efficiency, because we have to maintain our rural communities, we have to maintain our food production, but there are technologies available that can help make that significantly more efficient. But that does not let the cities off the hook. Mm-hmm. I'm proud alumni. I'm walking around campus yesterday. There's a metric shit ton of non-functional turf on this campus.
Hey, take it easy over there. Right, where's Catherine? Is she in?
That doesn't
Like year
need
two.
to be there. You know, you got areas of grass outside the Park Meadows Mall. I mean, the Front Range can do more. Salt Lake. I dropped my son off at the University of Utah last week. Utah can do more. Nevada can do more. But we've reduced our use by over 40% and added 800,000 people. So yes, agriculture has to be more efficient, and yes, cities have to be more efficient. Everybody has to be more efficient, and that's the only path forward on this river.
That might be the soundbite of the panel, the metric whatever ton.
Shit ton.
Apparently we're allowed to say that on panels now. But I think John brings up a lot of good points. We have a tried and true method in the Upper Basin of how we allocate water, the prior appropriation system. And I think John's right. We can all do more. We can all do more. But I'm not going to opine on how other states should do it. I think we all have to work within our budgets and figure out how to make things work within our own states. And I don't know if the debate should be how much comes from ag or not. It's, do we plan for it? Do we work with, do we do the things like John was talking about with efficiencies and that sorts of things? Do we plan for it, or do we let it happen? Or to us? And because hydrology will ultimately determine what the future looks like if we don't determine what it looks like before then. And so that's all I'm going to say. I think I won that one too, in succinctness.
You may have, because I'm going to go again. And I would just point out too that there's a memorandum of understanding across all 7 states among the municipalities for, goals and metrics for municipal conservation, including removing 30% of all non-functional turf within every one of those 40 jurisdictions. So this is not a siloed issue. This is not a me wagging my finger at people. The different communities across the basin have come together, have established goals, and I think that's where both local and state national funding comes in to help actually make that real.
I agree with John.
Right.
We sometimes like each other. I know the drama is what sells, but he's okay.
Our last 2 questions focus on conflict resolution, so hopefully it's not dramatic, but I think we have to ask the questions. So a lot of folks who are watching what's happening in the basin right now are concerned that litigation is inevitable, or maybe feel that way at the moment. And historically, this has been viewed as the third rail, a disaster to be avoided at all costs. But maybe in some minds, the mood on this question has changed. But what are you hearing from your constituents about that possibility? Might litigation be the hammer that's needed to reinvigorate the pursuit of a negotiated solution? Could an opportunity arise out of that possibility? And maybe are there certain issues that might only be resolved through the litigation process? So maybe, Becky, you can go first on this one.
I'm first on this one. Oh, you should let the lawyer go first on this one. I do want to say that we still believe that consensus is the best path forward. And I, quite frankly, still believe that that's possible. I know folks feel like that the time is ticking and that ship may have sailed. Like John mentioned, the law of the river is what 7 states say the law of the river is. And we can still do that. I believe that we can still do that. The lawyers will get rich. But I don't know if anybody will have any more certainty for the immediate future. And I think that's an important piece to to think about. And that's the concern that I hear from folks on the ground, is that the litigation doesn't provide certainty, and it also doesn't provide water. We're still going to need negotiated agreements to solve the math problem. It may answer the questions that John brought up, whether it's non-depletion obligation, delivery obligation, what do the tributaries mean, what is injury, what is causation. We may answer those questions. Those will just give us those answers. We still have to figure out how to work with a river that is producing less than we planned for. And how, again, like I think about what Carlos was saying, I was so glad that you spoke before us, but how is litigation going to provide a resilient future? How does it look at the basin wholly and create resiliency? I don't believe it does. And so I think, can we set aside, do we have to deal with these questions? Maybe we do. Maybe that's where we're at. I hope not. But if we have the answers to those questions, we're still going to have work to do.
Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, and I agree with what Becky said. Litigation will take enough years. You still need a multi-year operation plan, unless, a federal judge, I guess, enters, a specific injunction on exactly how the entire river is going to be operated. It's still going to take years to figure out. But I do think when you talk about litigation, it's lumped together, because you basically have a NEPA process that, there's going to be a record of decision, and anybody from New Jersey to San Diego can file a lawsuit on, and that's really not within the control of the 7 states as to whether or not we initiate that action. I won't articulate all of them, but there's multiple other venues that you could see the litigation pop off in. But then the big one is original jurisdiction litigation in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And only one of the 7 states can initiate that. And that's the one I truly believe we should try to avoid if we can, because, a side battle on a 28-month NEPA plan is one thing. Kicking off, when was, I don't know, Bushotsky's in the room somewhere. When was Arizona v. California filed? 1960, and the final, the final 30s, and the final decree was entered into in 2006. You're talking about multi-decadal grinding, non-answers, in front of the Supreme Court in all likelihood. So we can probably handle U.S. district litigation and operating within whatever, those district court judges put out there, but marching into the Supreme Court, it's an abdication of our responsibility. It's taken the 7 governors' representatives are taking our hands off the wheel when the day that happens.
Thanks, John. So the last question that we have prepared is maybe the flip side of that coin, and this idea of using a mediator to reinvigorate negotiations and help resolve the conflict. And that idea has recently been raised by some state principals. So how are you feeling right now about this alternative of bringing a mediator in? What would you hope to accomplish through mediation? And what would you see as the roles and responsibility of a mediator or mediation team at this point?
Well, first, I want to kind of describe the conversations I've been involved in. And the one is, there's, a few federal judges that I think helped in the Texas, New Mexico, Colorado litigation, and the idea of like one single, kind of former federal judge who doesn't have a ton of experience in Colorado River matters, but obviously, is an expert in the law. The other idea that I've heard floated around is Lower Basin picks one, Upper Basin picks one, and those two have absolute discretion to pick a third, and you have a 3-mediator panel. I'm probably more of a fan of the second, because I think they would bring a lot of expertise on the river in order to expedite that stuff. Some of the federal judges I've talked to, like, okay, well, we're going to need 6 months of white papers, and everybody gets to lay out their positions. Those are, I don't know if they're public documents or not, but they're arguably public documents of people, putting out their legal positions. So I'd rather get some experts involved. Look, I don't know if it'll help or not. I don't, but we're high-centered. The 7-state process, for the last 2.5 years, maybe we can live with, a 28-month plan with nobody filing a lawsuit. I hope so. But in terms of a long-term, durable, multi-decadal plan, we're not close. So if a mediator will help, let's do it.
That was pretty succinct, John. I think...
You didn't like me calling your first...
I know, I don't like it. It didn't feel good. It felt personal.
Well, you talked a long time on the first question.
Well, there's a lot there with that NEPA. And it just is a prelude to negotiating every 2 years. So,
I would also note the current proposal, as I understand it, the 2-year decision is about 60 days before every general election over the next 10 years.
That's a recipe for success.
That is how you get things done in this country.
So that's why we're at mediation, right? So that's why we brought it up, because I hope it isn't viewed as a failure. I hope, we've been called failures. Just last night, I think we were called failures. All 7 of us, not one of us, not one state, not just the feds or just the states. We're called failures. And the issues that we're dealing with now are different than anything that's been dealt with before. And we're dealing with hydrology that is not cooperating with a consensus, easy agreement. We're looking at infrastructure issues at the same time. We've got tribal issues, environmental issues, and interstate components that are really rising to heated positions. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, can we use a little help? It's not, is it different leadership? It is, does the leadership need help? And is there additional tools? This is a tool. This is a tool. And I a bit disagree with John. I think if we could get focused, we could get to a 2-year plan quickly. We could also get to a longer-term plan quickly, if we can set aside those things. And I think a mediator we have to be able to set aside the operations and the risk discussions and the legal discussions and be able to really focus on what is the actual problem. And I think that's what we've been struggling with, is we're trying to solve a legal problem, but we really need to first triage and deal with the operations. I think the proposals continue to drive towards legal theories and expectations that can't be met. So I would hope, and we're still in the figuring out phase of what that mediation would look like, and that's part of the process, right? Don't worry, we've all gotten multiple calls of people that would like to be a mediator. And really feel like they have the solution. But the mediators aren't the solution. The mediators create an environment for the solution. And that's why we propose the mediation, because I think we need to create the environment, because these are difficult times. And so we need a space to have the creative solutions, and I think we can still do that.
Great, thanks, Becky. I'd like to invite Carlos back up on stage now.
You did.
Carlos, come on back up, and we're going to do some Q&A. So our amazing Slido team, I think, is going to help us out. So Jason,
can I make a little comment?
Of course.
I mentioned that we're called failures, and it's all 7 of us. And I was thinking about that yesterday as I was looking at the Slido, and some of the questions that were coming through there. And I've heard that everybody wants us to come to an agreement. Everyone in this room wants us to come to agreement that that's what's important for the future of the basin. And I was reflecting on those questions yesterday and thinking, is that what the questions are driving to? Or are you driving to the train wreck? And so I just wanted to let you all know that, because it was interesting to me, because I think when we talk about what we and my partners, that we all we're invested in this. JB, Tom, John, Estevan, Brandon, Jean, myself. We don't do this because we don't care about it. We all very much care about it. And we want a solution. And I think we all have to think about our roles in this. And what is your role as part of the system? Because we are part of the system. And is it to aggravate the upper basin v. lower basin, or anti-feds, or this or that? I saw a lot of questions that were ugly. And I found that interesting, as there's a lot of critique on our failures. I've just thought about, what is everyone's role in this? That was it.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Becky. Appreciate that. Okay, Jason, no pressure now on you. And, Celine's going to lead us out. Okay, Celine, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with a positive question first. And this can be for any of the 3 of you. We have people asking what silver linings, milestones, or good things are happening in the negotiation process. And Carlos, if you want to weigh in with anything from the treaty minute negotiations, please do.
Go, Carlos.
Right. Have you ever wondered what it does to the presence of Mexico in the internal argument of the states? And it might be like you get invited to the home, to someone's home, and you sit down, and dinner is not ready because there's an argument going on in the family.
He won. He won the soundbite.
That's the silver lining.
I'll tell you what the silver lining is. I'll tell you what the silver lining is. I've wondered about that. In fact, I was writing to it. It's actually improved our game on the Mexican side. We've started thinking about things that were not present in the discussion regarding a highly centralized government that controls everything. But there are realities like the market. There are realities that really have to come to bear. Yesterday, Catherine Sorensen was talking about how sad she was for all the decisions that need to be made. I will beg to differ. I am not sad. I think the silver lining is that the basin somehow is asking of us something. And I think that's how I kind of divorced myself from discussion regarding the amounts and so forth, and started thinking about and talking about resilience and how we can actually begin to erase imaginary lines and start doing things for the basin. Because at the end of the day, and thinking about the allocation, the firm volume allocation versus percentage and so forth, that's a vehicle, but that's not the destination. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. And so if we can begin, given the complication, the complexity of the discussions about allocation and so forth, if we can begin to stop thinking about the vehicle and think about the destination, I think that would really help us along the way.
Wow.
I'm going to talk about the vehicle. Well, because I think the silver lining is, California could absolutely take a legal position that they don't have to take a drop of reductions until the Central Arizona project is bone dry. And they haven't done that. They've come to the table with 440,000 acre feet towards the 1.25 million acre feet in reductions in the lower basin. So the lower basin proposal has strong silver linings in it, or maybe golden linings in it. The lower basin proposal acknowledges that operations from Powell to Meade will be significantly below the minimum objective release in the long-range operating criteria, for at least the next, 2 years without, at least I think, any of the 3 lower division states, bringing a legal challenge to that. The upper initial unit operations are within the records of decision that, govern, how those units operate. So there are 85–90% positive things in a 28-month operating plan right in front of our face again. So I know it's all doom and gloom, and maybe we'll be sitting at the same conference, in the summer of 2029, and the stick of dynamite will have been lit. But the deal that's right in front of our face is not a bad deal.
I think the silver lining, I ultimately hope there's a silver lining at the destination. But I do think one of the things that have come out of the last few rough years is that there has been a major shift in looking at the system more as supply-based rather than demand-based. And I also applaud California. I think that was a huge step of leadership. So I appreciate that. And I know that comes from across the state, but also wanting to acknowledge that we all have to shift based on supply, and that we are not the masters of land and water, and we cannot create something that isn't ours to create. And I believe that that's where we've at least shifted to that a bit, and I think that that's helpful.
Thanks, Becky. Okay, back to Celine.
Now for the negative question.
Yeah, go negative.
I'm not going to go negative yet.
Good, Celine. Well, we're almost out of time.
So there's a few questions, Becky, to your point about the 2-year timelines for negotiation not being feasible. And I think the theme of the questions is really around, well, what is feasible given that there isn't consensus now? And how do we, what do we do to adaptively manage the river in a time of such deep uncertainty?
Well, I do think there was some pieces of what the feds put out in their informal first steps, and that it was looking at things based on conditions. So not only the conditions of what's happening in that specific year, but where is the resilience of the system, meaning some of the storage. And so I think that is a path forward. It's the equation associated with that. And I think that's where we need to go, is what does that mean when the natural flow is this and storage is this? What do we do? What do we do? And I think making a decision and sticking with it and is going to be incredibly important, at least for a year-to-year or 2-year basis. And so I mentioned we need some level of certainty so that we can kind of rebuild. And maybe that is some sort of determination of what the releases are in the next 2 years. Is it, okay, if we have really bad hydrology and the storage starts at this, it is Y, and go from there. So I think that's a potential opportunity.
Please go ahead, Carlos.
Can I add something? The thing about the vehicle and the destination is that they're not really exclusive of each other. Mm-hmm. We can actually begin to talk about a lot of things. And I've heard this in the binational negotiation in previous sessions. Maybe we can hold off on talking about shortage reductions and so forth, but there's so much stuff that we can talk about in terms of salinity, there are so many measures that are irrelevant regarding the uncertainty that, begs the question, why are we not talking on 2 different tables? Mm-hmm. Why are we not making hay? In many ways, the delay in terms of the agreements between the states and so forth has bought time for Mexico. But instead of just twiddling our thumbs, maybe we can begin to talk jointly about other stuff.
Anything to add, John? Well, Carlos, I'll build off that comment. There's a few questions about what's working. So, Carlos, there's some questions about what the U.S. can take from the binational process in terms of creativity with solutions. And then for John and Becky, people are curious about what's working. Like, what are you doing in your states? What are you seeing happening around the basin that's actually starting to move the needle?
Well, many of you were at CRUA or maybe read my comments, and they were basically boiled down to all of our polished public comments these days are, here's the hard things we've done, here's how hard it is to do anything else, and here's why other people should do more hard stuff. But what's working in Nevada is we're using a lot less water. We have implemented incredibly hard conservation measures. We have several ongoing litigations over implementing really hard conservation measures. But I do agree with Becky. I don't want to be some school marm and lecture people in other jurisdictions on what they should do, but everybody's got to use less. But that's all a wind up to, we are working on the supply side. We had representatives in Carlsbad, just north of California, San Diego, this week, signing a memorandum of agreement to look at how to move water across state lines. San Diego has made such big investments in conservation in the Imperial Valley, in desalination in Carlsbad, and in conservation in their service territory, that San Diego actually has quite a bit of extra water right now. And whether that is transferred to somebody else for their use or used to rebuild storage, it's a success story. And that happened Tuesday. Metropolitan's Pure Water Project, which would take almost all of the wastewater from Santa Barbara to San Diego, 19 million people. Almost every toilet that's flushed, every shower that's taken, almost all that wastewater goes into the Pacific Ocean and is gone. So Pure Water would take all that water, build $4+ billion in infrastructure and recharge different aquifers in Southern California. And my board's already approved $750 million in our capital plan to invest in that project. So there are solutions on the supply side out there, but they're incredibly expensive for relatively, as mentioned earlier, if you're going from 15 million to 10 million, making up 5 million acre feet probably isn't going to happen. But if you could make up a million acre feet, that may well be within the realm of human capacity.
Thank you, John, for being an example. So I think, thank you for asking that question also about what's working, because I think oftentimes we've been focusing on what's not working and pointing the fingers. And so it took me a little bit to think about, okay, what is working? And there's a couple things. So I think when we see someone lead, and I want to give props to Nevada as a leader, we try to look and emulate that, look and see and try to emulate that. So we have done some things within Colorado, particularly non-functional turf related, and trying to reduce our use that way and be more responsible stewards of the resource. And so I think seeing what others are doing and seeing that as an example is a good thing. We've also, because of hydrology, gotten support for projects across the state. So whether that's environmental projects, water flow projects, you heard about some of them yesterday with the Uncompahgre, who's dealing with less than 50% of their allocation this year. You hear about some of these creative ways that people are working. We've also seen support on the ground in terms of things you might hear about our sports betting. Please bet while you're here, because that water or that money goes to water projects, like whatever you lose, the taxes based on that. So try to bet, but also try to lose. But we see broader support, and that isn't just brick and mortar projects. A lot of that is creative projects on the ground, trying to keep water in the rivers and really build a sustainable and resilient future for Colorado, which then also goes beyond the borders. But I also think a success is our strict administration. This year sucks. And it is incredibly hard. I urge you to get on the ground and see what's happening. And there are folks in this room that have, and you don't leave without shedding a tear, because it is real and painful of what the strict administration is doing on the ground. But also how that is responsible. In a year like this year, just to give a bit of perspective, you heard the stories from Uncompahgre yesterday. That's one of the more senior water rights holders, and they're at a 50% allocation. Ute Mountain Ute, it was at an 8% federal allocation. 8%. 8%. The community came together, areas around, and Ute Mountain Ute had to purchase and lease to get up to 14% of their allocation. So they worked with their neighbors. And so while that seems depressing, and it is, there is the structure there that can create partnerships. And that is real suffering on the ground, and that is their livelihood. And our administration, that strict administration, still allowed enough flexibility to create a little bit more. Sorry.
Of course.
I am a Ute Mountain Ute. My name is Donald White. I live here in Lakewood. When I go out and talk to the public, I remind them the Utes are the people at the headwaters of the southern Rocky Mountains. The Platte, the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, San Juan, Colorado, the Gunnison, the White, the Yampa, all of that. We used to live 200 years ago. And today, as she has just explained, 8%. I listen to my leaders. I have no responsibility because I haven't lived here. I have a professional career and I've ended it, but I've been away. But I hear my relatives come to me, Don, do you know of any springs or seats on our land? Because I walk the land on my reservation. And I hear that. And I wonder, how did we go from the headwaters of all of these streams where on my reservation I have no continuous water source traveling across my land? That's my perspective. And that's why I come here. That's all I can do. But I speak to the public, let them know that we, as youths, understand what is important. I know we don't cry, but when it comes to this issue, water is life.
Thank you, John.
For sharing those comments with us. We still have a little bit more time, so maybe back to Celine.
Can I just
Please.
weigh in on the question of what is working? The environment has become increasingly central to the discussion. If I think back to the start of the negotiations for Minute 319, the environmental variable was way out at the margins. It is no longer, and I think that our friend here has just mentioned why it is a good idea that within the Colorado River discussion, the environment becomes more and more of a indispensable variable. The second thing that I want to point out is that if you think that we need to look for things that are working in the Colorado River, talking about U.S.-Mexico relations, think of the Rio Bravo, Rio Grande. And then you can turn back and see the distance that we've moved in the Colorado River because of how things are in the discussion there. That's it.
Well, thank you. I'm going to build off of Mr. White's comments and ask a question about tribal collaboration. So there's a question about how we are building tribal collaboration and not just consultation into processes, and please feel free to weigh in on both sides of the border.
Or no, I'll go. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of work to do. I want to be honest about that. We are trying. We have to acknowledge when you know better, you should do better. And I think we've tried to take some of the steps in that direction. I see it across the basin. I can speak primarily to the upper basin. And I want to speak about our positives, but I want to still speak about our, at least my personal failures still as it relates to tribal relations. We have worked both within Colorado and across the upper basin to elevate the tribal voice. And that, we do that in a couple different ways. In the state of Colorado, we have regular discussions, consultation. I can only tell you that as I sit at a table, a negotiation table or any table, that I have to bring those conversations to the table. And I think that is an important first step. We have, across the upper basin, tried to align and unite not just the 4 upper basin states, but the 6 tribes that are federally recognized within the upper basin. And folks in this room know what we've done on that, so I don't want to belabor it too much, but to celebrate a bit of the success of that. Those were, it happened far too late, to be perfectly honest. The fact that that's only happened in the last couple of years, that 4 upper basin states and 6 upper basin tribes have met in a unified way is long overdue. But I think it is incredibly important. And so we have that MOU that essentially governs and our commitment of how we interact, how we talk, how often we talk, what we're discussing, and what our commitment is to each other. To each other. And I believe that's a huge step forward, a huge step forward. I reflected yesterday. I had an opportunity to have some discussions that allowed me to reflect a bit. And the prioritization, obviously for me personally, is now the tribes that I feel most tied to, right? I feel most connected to the 6 upper basin tribes. And I had to reflect through this conversation yesterday about maybe needing a broader perspective beyond just that. And I think oftentimes we're the human piece of this, right? Is that we're trying to get what we want, what we feel like we need. And so we've now prioritized, the 10 sovereigns, and so my focus is often on that, and there may need to be a broader perspective, and we may need to try to figure out a way that those voices are heard louder. It's the responsibility of elevating a voice. is huge, but more importantly, it's how do we make space, how do we allow ourselves to create the space that they can elevate their own voices, that they're not requiring someone else to elevate their voice. And so I am committed to continue to doing better. I think we've taken steps, but that doesn't mean that we're done. And so we're going to continue to move forward. And thank you to my friends for making sure that I was able to reflect, to provide the mirror for me.
And I think I'm saying essentially the same thing as Becky, but maybe in a different way. It's not a uniform issue, right? Arizona has 22 Native American tribes, with, claims to the Colorado River or Colorado River water rights even within the decree. Nevada has 1, Wyoming has 0. You're not always invited into those discussions. There's federal trust responsibilities. There's negotiations between the state where tribal reservations reside. But to the extent we can be helpful, we have attempted to do so. I had conversations with the Gila River Indian community yesterday. We have strongly supported the Navajo Nation's ability to move their 50,000 acre feet of upper Colorado River water downstream to other users in Arizona. So for the states without a large tribal presence, which is largely Wyoming and Nevada, you got to kind of pick your spots and be invited to the conversation. You can't just barge in and be like, I'm going to tell you guys, what to do with your relationships here.
I'll just add that we're in the same learning process in Mexico. We're learning how to just to support what Becky was saying, how to help contribute so that they raise their voice. And there are tribes that straddle the U.S.-Mexico border. The Kukapa are on both sides of the border. And I want to thank the tribes in the U.S. for requiring Mexico to begin to think more about the tribes than we were, because the tribes in Mexico are not as recognized as a sovereign as you are in the U.S. And reaching out across the border with your brothers within tribes will help them to raise their voice and will force us to learn a little more. Sensitivities and acknowledging rights is still a work in progress, to say the least, in Mexico.
All right, I have one more tribal question before I move to the last couple of really hard ones for the end. There are some questions about where the states are, particularly in the Upper Basin, on support for the Northern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Agreement. So could you explain that and how tribal water settlements fit into resolving water stress in the basin?
Well, I think John just said his opinion and is incredibly supportive. And I think we submitted comments regarding the Navajo settlement. I know that that's what you're talking about. And I would ask folks to refer to that. I think we're also continually in a difficult situation because we don't know what the future looks like, and that's a hard place to be. But there are, I think, very positive and supportive comments related to that.
And I'll just note for the record to back up that we strongly support it. Senator Cortez Masto sits on Senate Indian Affairs Committee and voted in favor of it in committee. So Nevada fully supports the Navajo.
All right. Becky, I'm going to direct the next question.
The hard questions?
These are getting hard.
Great. Bring it.
And I want to bring together a few question threads that I'm seeing. So I think people really heard your comment about the Upper Basin's interest in setting up a contribution plan or program. And there are also some questions referring back to a panel yesterday about the Upper Basin's ability to stand up a conservation program. Are they the same thing? And for either, if they're not, you can answer it for both. What's going to be required and how fast can we do that?
So we stand ready to do that. I think you heard Scott Cameron talk a bit about the $100 million potential yesterday. We're hopeful with that. That would be helpful. Hopeful and helpful is the things that come to mind as I think about that. That would be helpful in the timing to get something set up. We're kicking that off across, well, we've already kicked it off across all 4 Upper Basin states. But I appreciate you also bringing up the nuance of contribution and conservation. You can think about conservation in the very typical way that most are thinking about it, whether it's municipal and that kind of conservation, or you think about it in terms of ag fallowing and those sorts of things. But when we talk about contribution, we're also talking about optimizing how we're using reservoir storage, potentially moving things, and incorporating the tribal waters into that. So that's not just standard what you think about conservation. And so trying to be broader to allow more participation. And I think that's the nuance between both. That money from the federal government would be incredibly helpful. I think you all probably know that the majority of the money that has been dispersed from the recent federal investments have not landed as much in the Upper Basin. I think about 5% of the monies have ended up in the Upper Basin. And so that's a component of equity and equitable that I think as we look at participation needs to be factored in. And so we might be able to move a little quicker if that occurs. So thank you to our federal partners for allowing a little snark.
All right, John, the next question was Lower Basin specific, but I think it would be great if any of you answered it. Do we know what it would take to set legal theories aside?
That's the hardest question. Go ahead.
Yep, no.
I think we need a durable plan somehow that looks at risk and shares risks. And holy crap, I think the answer is still no. But it is. I don't know if we can get to a solution without that. Things are, even if we find a way to do it in a temporary basis, it's incredibly important. And it is hard to negotiate and prepare for litigation at the same time. And I think people need to really realize that negotiators, you can't necessarily do that. And it creates an internal conflict. And so my focus is on the negotiation. And I will continue to be focused on the negotiation. And that can help us put our legal theories aside.
And I will expand a little bit. In just a little history, in May of 2005, we had our toes right up on the line of Supreme Court litigation. And Secretary Norton at that time sent us a letter and basically said, I'm gonna, come up with operating plans and shortages in the lower basin, and you come up with a plan or I will. And that's what led to basically the 18 months that ultimately produced the 07 guidelines. Now, different people in the room will have different opinions about the efficiency of the 07 guidelines, but within the 7-state agreement that endorsed those guidelines, there was we won't sue until we go through a substantial consultation process. So any state could have withdrawn from the 07 guidelines over the last, whatever we're at, 19 years, and none did. So that's likely the art of the possible in terms of, a durable plan. It's not gonna be lead pipe lock. It's gonna be, here's the way we think we're gonna operate, given the facts we have today, and it'll take a lot of political will to be the one to split from the herd and file that lawsuit.
Any advice for us, Carlos?
Keep going. No, I don't have anything to add to that.
I'll end on the money question. There's a question about whether states are prepared to cost share some of the solutions along with the federal government.
Nevada is. We've got $20 million in our budget for Water Smart Landscape this year. We've committed tens of millions of dollars, under DCP, under the lower basin proposals. We didn't take any money from the federal government, for the 3 million acre feet in conservation, that was achieved in 2023. Nevada's put our money where our mouth is. I can't speak for anybody else.
I think Colorado's the same. We've put our money where our mouth is, and we are prepared to honor that request.
All right, Chris, I'll hand it back over to you as we're at the end of time.
Thanks, Celine. So please join me in thanking our speakers.